Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Carolina Weather Group. That awkward pause that always gets us. Welcome to the Wednesday, June 21st edition of the Carolina Weather Group. We're happy that you're joining us tonight. We want to start off with saying our guest, Stacy Stewart from the National Hurricane Center, excuse me, will not be joining us tonight. Obviously, Tropical Cindy about to make landfall in the Louisiana, Texas areas. Watching TV up above me. So Stacy's a little busy tonight. So hopefully we can get Stacy back on later on this summer, or maybe early fall, to kind of talk about the National Hurricane Center. And guys, I'm going to bring you in since it's kind of a different show than what we expected. We finally got to see some of the new tropical outlooks and potential tropical cyclone development graphics and stuff like that. So I'm sure we can talk about that tonight as well. But again, Stacy Stewart from the National Hurricane Center will not be joining us tonight. A little busy tonight with Tropical Storm Cindy. But we look to get Stacy back on the show later on this summer or early this fall. Besides that, live broadcast tonight, we're going to be talking about Cindy and its effects, not only along the Gulf Coast, but here in the Southeast as well. So if you are watching tonight, please feel free to send any questions or comments to us via Twitter. Carolina WX Group is the best way you can submit those questions. But if you're not a Twitter follower and you want to watch on, if you're more of a Facebook person, send those comments via our Facebook page. We'll monitor both of those and get to them as needed throughout the rest of the show. So again, active tropical week. We had Tropical Storm Brett and Tropical Storm Cindy. So it's been kind of a hectic week for the Hurricane Center. So we totally understand Stacy not being with us tonight. So guys, it's been fairly calm here in the Southeast. I know Monday, we've had a slow cold front sagging through the area, and here in my house, I can say we got 2.25 inches of rain in about a 90-minute time period. So we've had some heavy rain on Monday, but besides that, it's been kind of quiet over the past few days. How's things up in the Bristol, Tennessee area, Ricky?
We've been kind of dry, and we've been telling folks to enjoy the dry weather because we are expecting some of that moisture from Cindy to move into our area. Really probably coming late Thursday into Friday, Saturday, and then the European ones bring us another slug of moisture as we go into Sunday and Monday. So we'll keep an eye on that one. But pretty calm, pretty nice, not too bad for June, first day of summer, and we were in the low 80s. So I guess we can't complain, especially after last year when we were hitting 90 all the time.
Yeah, we're not in that drought, and it has been a little bit cooler. I think we've hit 90 degrees a few times, but nothing like last year. So, Shay, how's things down there along the coastal areas of South Carolina?
Well, it was hot and muggy for a few days there over the weekend, but then now we've got some cloud cover and insulation overhead. Plus, we've got rains. Things are staying a little bit on the cool side. So we're about low to mid 80s. And I mean, for the first day of summer, we can't really complain about temperatures. Seeing as we had some low 90s that felt like near 100 degrees. I think our heat indices climbed to near 100 there by, I think, Saturday and Sunday. So not bad start. It is, like I said, it's wet and muggy here. We're on and off showers and storms. Some of that Gulf moisture from Tropical Storm Cindy being kind of funneled up over to our area and along the cold front. The cold front's definitely stalled. Looks like it's fizzling out mid-state, upstate. I thought maybe it would kind of near the coast by yesterday, but it looks like the Bermuda High has kept that back inland from the coastline. In fact, we did see some northeasterly winds and east flow actually drive over the top of the front and down and sink down along the coastline today. That was kind of a surprise. I thought we'd hold the southerly flow, but it got undercut by that cooler air sinking. So, yeah, I mean, a little bit of dynamics along the coastline ahead of that front. As it breaks down over time, it looks like we were in the window for a lot of rain. I was almost certain we would probably get some torrential downfalls, but that has weakened as the track of Cindy has gone further to the northwest along the Louisiana-Texas border, and we'll get into that in just a minute. So that's our weather to be expected for the next couple of days. We're going to keep the clouds around, some on and off showers and storms. I think we may get some dry lining at the coast, maybe by Friday, as the sea breeze turns on and another cold front approaches the region. We may clear out by Friday and see some more pleasant weather in the sky, but the temperatures will go up, of course, with sunshine. So back to you, Scotty.
Yeah, interesting you say that, Shay. I was working an event last night at Charlotte Motor Speedway, and it's kind of almost like we were wedged in last night as well. We had some fog and some just light rain and drizzle. Really not par for late June weather standards wise. So interesting about that. But it does look like that eventually next week, like you said, Shay, that cold front will move through and we'll kind of get some clear weather. So I'm going to toss it off to you and Ricky. You guys are kind of our tropical experts. With Shay, you living there in Charleston, and Ricky has lived up in or was born up in the Virginia Beach area. So you guys have a little bit more experience in tropics than I do. So it has been a busy week. So Shay, I think you were talking earlier on social media this week. We've had 2 tropical systems this week in June. It's off to an early start.
It is often an early start. One thing that's significant, the Gulf isn't as significant as what developed with Brett across the Atlantic, the intertropical convergence zone. Being that far south, typically we see more activity as that ITCZ, we call it, lifts further north and you get into the Cape Verde season. Things tend to spin up a little bit more off of Africa, but this one snuck in down below and it really just kind of held on as a strong tropical wave all the way across and became Tropical Storm Brett Islands. So Tobago, those islands in the windward chain definitely felt some tropical storm force winds, but as it moved into the central Caribbean, it got torn apart by some upper shear and just a more hostile environment. So, but that was still significant. I think we got up. Ricky, did those winds, I hate to ask this on air, but do we get 45 miles per hour for that system?
To be honest with you, I didn't even realize that Brett dissipated and wasn't a thing anymore because I haven't been paying attention to that one. That one hasn't really, it was certainly a neat little thing to have happen, but it was out there and we had other concerns at the time. And I was like, oh, neat, a tropical cyclone in the Caribbean.
Right. Yeah. It quickly went down to a depression and a post-tropical. And it's just barely a wave now. I think it got pretty much caught up in a slough of southwesterly upper shear. So that system dissipated. But more importantly, in the Gulf, which affected the United States, was Tropical Storm Cindy, which came originally from east of the Yucatan Peninsula as some moisture shielding came together. When we say moisture shield, we mean that the easterly trades that blow through places like Key West, places you're familiar with maybe down in Puerto Rico and some of those islands, the Caribbean islands. What you get is you get an easterly trade flow and you get these batches or surges of moisture that pile up into the Western Caribbean. And then you get a little bit of southerly wind up from the East Pacific. You end up with a little bit of rotation. And so what happens is you get a little tropical wave. And then as that heads northwest, what it did was it kind of jumped over the Yucatan Peninsula and came together. Just the right conditions for some surface rotation to come together. And then it became ultimately Tropical Storm Cindy. We thought maybe it would be subtropical with an extended wind field. The warm core was definitely going to stay for it. But we thought maybe the system would be more elliptical or asymmetrical and keep an extended wind field way beyond the center. Sometimes subtropical can mean that the wind field is further removed away from the center of convection. So it did not, and it's about to hit the coast. So I'll go ahead and share screen. And let me know when you can see it.
We got
you good?
Yep.
So here's the latest rainbow imagery from the National Hurricane Center. And you can see the system really doesn't look, it looks rather rugged. It has a dry core. You can see some convection along the north and northwestern quadrant, which that's kind of a first. Usually this convection's been along the north to northeastern and eastern side. But you can still see plenty of moisture training up into the Florida Panhandle along Mississippi, Alabama, Florida. A lot of that tropical banding coming up from the Gulf, just feeding over the coastline. Look at the track. Here's the latest from NHC. You can see the track here I'd say tonight, this thing's going to make landfall as a tropical storm. Winds are 50 miles per hour. Pressure is at, I think it was 995 millibars the last I looked. And this is going to make landfall right along the Texas-Louisiana coastline, head north, and then swing to the east as an upper level. The upper level jetting is going to pull this system off to the east pretty quickly. So we're looking for some increased rain along that area. Here's the COD GOES 16 imagery. You get a better look at that. You can see the convection firing off along the northwest quadrant, even the western quadrant in some of those last frames there. Water vapor imagery, this is mid-level. This is why the system has such a dry core. This is 500 millibar mid-level winds, and you can see all that dry air, the yellows and oranges, wrapped around to the west and south and southeast of the storm. You can see that dry air kind of wrapping in around to the northeast as well at this point. So that's kind of our latest look at the system. It doesn't look that impressive, but it is expected to weaken once it hits landfall, of course, and then drives off to the northeast and across the country. So rainfall totals, I'll let Ricky talk a little bit about that. Real quick, morph composite. Now, we talked about that dry air, and you can see this moisture. Basically, we talked about the moisture shield piling up in the Western Caribbean and into the Gulf, and you can still see at the surface that there's still pretty good amount of moisture with the system. That dry air is at the mid-level, which is going to keep it from strengthening at all. So that's a good thing. But the rainfall totals for the Gulf Coast have been pretty large. There's been a lot of flooding there. So I'll leave it up to you, Ricky.
Yeah, I mean, that's really going to be the story with this system, I think, is going to be the heavy rainfall. Not so much in areas where the storm is impacting now, perhaps, but even all the way up into portions of Tennessee, Mississippi, maybe even Kentucky. Here's, as Shay was showing, some of the rain and satellite imagery now, and I've turned on the METARs to show you some of the strong winds. And we do have strong winds a decent distance away from the center there, all the way over to Pensacola. Some of these bands are coming through. It's interesting to see like the spiral rain bands all the way over here along the Florida Panhandle with the center of circulation south of Lake Charles there. But the heavy rainfall potential is really going to be what I'm concerned about as we go into, let's say, the next 2 or 3 days. Let me share a different screen here, and I'll bring up Google Earth. And this is the 5-day WPC outlook. And you can notice the big area of heavy rainfall. And I think some areas, this is probably underdoing it, but 3, 4, 5 inches, certainly possible across portions of eastern Texas, up in Louisiana, Arkansas, western Tennessee, and even up into portions of eastern Kentucky, central Tennessee, probably in West Virginia as well. But, as you guys very well know, with tropical moisture, sometimes they can overachieve a little bit. So these 3, 4 inch range numbers may actually be a little on the low side. As Shay was showing you earlier with that precipitable water imagery, there's a lot of moisture with this. And when you combine the extra lift that a cold front coming in from the northwest is going to provide, it's kind of a perfect scenario for big, heavy rainfall totals across this area. Let's show you the WPC excessive rainfall outlook. And I will stop sharing this and I will share a different screen. Give me one moment. We will share this one. Can you guys see that there?
Yep, we got you, Ricky.
Okay, cool. I didn't know if it was still showing the Hangout screen. So this is the WPC excessive rainfall outlook. And you notice, interesting, they actually go to high tonight across portions of the Florida, southern Alabama, southern Mississippi, Gulf Coast region. And then we get into that large swath of moderate flooding potential across portions of Tennessee up into eastern Kentucky, West Virginia. This is approaching the 1-year anniversary of those floods in Greenbrier, West Virginia. So bad timing when it comes to the potential for flooding there. And then really it extends into portions of western Southwest Virginia as well. Lee, Wise, Dickinson, Buchanan County, probably in the portions of Russell Scott. But the interesting thing, Shay, is you were kind of showing that water vapor imagery earlier, is whether we'll get a dry slot. And Scotty, that's one of the things for you guys in portions of the, stop sharing there, for portions of, Western North Carolina, you may luck out a little bit to where you guys don't get a ton of rain from it. I guess depending on your point of view, luck out in terms of being in that dry slot.
Yeah, that's definitely that was a concern for us earlier in this week. It's no big secret. You guys, as well in the Bristol area, Ricky, we've had a lot of rain this spring and early summer, and we was looking at this tropical system maybe bearing down on us, giving us 5-6 inches of rain from that. And it was looking like the possibility of some flash flooding for Western North Carolina, and thankfully that dry slot's moved in, and it looks like we are going to kind of lug out. We may get some heavy rain Friday into Saturday morning, but with it not being a couple of days spread out and just kind of in and out, definitely help us out, kind of dry out. We've been really wet, and so that dry slot for this time is playing in our cards to the good side. So
one of the things
to that.
heavy rainfall potential. That water that falls, especially across the Ohio River Valley, the Tennessee River Valley, has to go somewhere. I saw a release from TVA just a little bit ago. They're going to lower some of the levels at their reservoirs, which is typical what they do ahead of heavy rainfall events. But we could have the potential, to have some creek, stream, river rises as we go into the weekend across portions of, I think, central Kentucky, probably central Tennessee, maybe East Tennessee as well. Not a major flood event, but certainly something to keep our eye on.
So, yeah, gentlemen, you were talking about how the system's going to slide up and around the mountains along the windward side of the mountains. And I'm just going to run the GFS. This is off Tropical Tidbits. Our friend Levi Cowan does a wonderful job with the site. But if you notice that feature, if you see the little dot out here in the Atlantic, that's Bermuda. And this is a Bermuda High. This is a classic blocking pattern that sits out in the ocean and steers a lot of these systems. This is why cold fronts come here to die in the southeast in the summertime, because this high pressure keeps everything kind of piled up inland. And I'm going to run this forward, and you can see how this high just sort of sits. And all of that activity goes up and around it. In time, that high does erode, and it backs off to the east, and then the cold front will be able to advance, but then it builds back in, and that cold front is going to stall. So this is sort of a in this GFS, you start to get 108 hours out with a cold front. Things kind of get a little bit erroneous, but you can kind of see what's going on there. But very, very unique how that all works, how the system, the steering pattern, not for Cindy. Cindy was steered by some other factors, but you can see as anything approaches the southeast with these strong Bermuda highs in the summertime, you can see the effect that it has as it goes up and around. There was one other thing I wanted to show, and Ricky was showing the winds earlier. This is our Datascope viewer. You have this in Storm Track on Wind Alert, and you can see some of these values. They're definitely holding tropical storm force winds and higher, and gusting up to 50 miles per hour. Now, a lot of these stations, you have to remember, there's a lot of oil rigs out here in the Gulf of Mexico. So there's going to be some biased readings. These are higher up. You're talking 81 feet at South Marsh. There's another one over here, Ship Shoal. That's 246 feet high. So some of these values that might be picked up in some of the products are definitely biased on the readings. You think, that high up, the winds will be higher than at the absolute surface. So we kind of come over here closer to the coastline, and we have some other weather stations, some of our weather stations. This one is 38 feet high, and we have 25 miles per hour. This is along the northwest quadrant, so probably not seeing the strongest winds with an offshore flow in this area. You tend to get a dirtier wind flow. But some of these areas, Eugene Island, 33 feet, gusting to 40 miles per hour. You definitely could see some sustained tropical storm force winds along these zones, along the coastal zones. There was a tornado in Fort Walton Beach, Florida, and tornado warnings were up. It is in the local storm report, but they still have to verify what strength it was. There was some trees down. I got in on some of that action and relayed some information to the NWS chat there. But you can definitely see here the winds are up. It's very windy in this area, very squall-like conditions going on, especially as we get into Pensacola, Florida, and on to the east. These tropical bands are moving in well removed from the center of Cindy. So this is another reason why tropical storms in the Gulf of Mexico can be so dangerous, because there's so much moisture available, and with the warm waters, the warm air, you have the subtropical jet feeding aloft, and you have all this rain spreading all the way even into Florida. So the cold front really only drops down to, I would say, northern mid-Georgia, maybe even into parts of just northern Florida, where the cold front pretty much dissipates, and the rest of this is Gulf moisture training up and converging into that front. So that's a pretty significant values. But that's the latest on the winds there. I think steering pattern again with these upper level winds going from west to east across the country. This is what's going to ultimately pick up these winds, mid to upper level winds, to pull it away. Originally, we thought maybe the Euro would be right by taking this thing into southern Texas and just sort of dissipating over Mexico. But it looks like the GFS, Ricky, your thoughts on that? I think the GFS did a pretty good job, especially from like a week out.
Which is surprising, because when we talked about the GFS upgrade, what was the one group that didn't want the GFS upgrade to be implemented? The Hurricane Center, because they didn't see any positive feedback from it, which is, interesting to see how it got this one even early in the going, as you said, pretty good compared to some of the other modeling.
Shay, you were talking about, I was just skimming the NWS chat. for all the weather offices along the Gulf. You're talking about that tornado warning. I did pull up the Mobile weather office there, and it did say confirmation from law enforcement of a tornado on the ground near Highway 84 in Covington County.
And I've seen a lot of pictures floating around on Twitter over the past, I guess, 20 minutes or so. I guess there was a water spout that came ashore or got very close to shore in Pensacola Beach.
Yep.
And some people were tweeting those pictures to James Spann, the other typical meteorologist. Talking about the tornado risk, though, here's the SPC outlooks. And, obviously highest along the Gulf Coast states, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and portions of Florida. But that risk does extend a little bit north and east in the coming days. Here's the day 2 outlook, pretty much just slightly west of the same regions. Going into day 3 here, the Storm Prediction Center has a slight risk out for portions of northern Alabama, southern portions of Tennessee, and northeast portions of Mississippi. Even a small risk into portions of our area, Scotty, in western North Carolina. Wouldn't shock me at all to see a gusty shower or storm, or maybe even isolated tornado in northeast Tennessee, right along that storm track as the system pulls up to the north and east.
Yeah, that's something you always have to watch. We've had our fair share of Gulf of Mexico landfalling tropical events that move up through the upstate and western North Carolina into northeast Georgia. And those are always eager to produce a few small – sorry, I was looking at my Twitter account. A few small spin-ups, and that's likely a possibility as well as we go into the week. Talking with the guys from Memphis Weather, we've had Eric on a few times, and Cindy is looking to affect the Memphis area. So Eric and the guys at Memphis Weather may be joining us here in just a little bit to kind of talk about the impacts there in western Tennessee and the northern Mississippi area. So working with those guys behind the scene to try to get those on to kind of get their perspective as well. So that's why I was kind of scatterbrained there for a minute.
No, you go right ahead, Scotty. Good catch. I was gonna mention Eric Perseus earlier. It'd be great to have him on. He loves tropical weather. He loves to jump on and chime in with that. So as far rainfall, Ricky, I tell you that area and it's gonna be interesting. If you remember Hurricane Bill, 2012, I think it was Hurricane Bill, when it came ashore in Texas, it held together rotation for quite some time once it moved into the central United States and started this very, very similar track to what the system has. They had a lot of rain beforehand, which made the ground super saturated. There was river flooding. There was all kinds of, basically you had a pool of water on the ground for a system to draw from once it moved on land. So we call that the brown ocean effect. When a system moves on land and actually maintains tropical status for some time as it moves on, it can sort of sap the juice out of the land and live on it for a little bit longer. So it's a pretty neat idea. I'm gonna watch to see what happens here. They haven't had as much rain as before Tropical Storm Bill moved ashore, but it'll be certainly interesting to watch to see if the moisture content holds and all the way into the northeast United States. Back then there was a strong Bermuda high as well, which actually shielded us in the southeast in Charleston. We barely saw any rain from that whole event. So we'll see what happens with it. I'd be interested to find what the moisture train will do and keep that Gulf moisture coming up from the south as it moves off to the northeast.
Well, I was looking at some tornado stuff earlier. I looked at the tornado warning they had in, New Orleans. I guess it was around 1 o'clock, maybe 2 o'clock this afternoon. And Scotty, the interesting thing with that was, want to guess what the beam height was? The max beam height I was able to spot any rotation on?
I would say it was pretty low.
It was about 4,000 feet.
Yeah.
Want to guess what the lowest scan of the 88D is across much of our region?
Yeah, right. Yeah,
6,000, 7,000 or so.
Yeah.
So that's the thing, these low-topped mini supercells, in a way, pretty hard to spot the rotation on them sometimes when they're moving through.
They are, and Ricky, as well as I do here in our area, we kind of get those little QLCS type systems, and that's what these kind of tornadoes, they're there and they're gone within a minute or two. So very hard to predict for sure. So that's something I would not want to be a forecaster tonight in the South Alabama, South Mississippi area as these bands come on the shore.
Yeah, especially those water spouts. So, yeah, that whole area, Okaloosa Island, Pensacola Beach, I'm looking at them now. I'm looking at the wind speeds. We got sustained winds of 30, 31 miles per hour, gusting to 40. That area is very prone. I know large group of kiteboarders in that area, and I always bring up kiteboarding in the show, but these guys are in tune with the weather there, and they're always out on the water, and they see water spouts all the time. That's a very common area for water spouts to form and come onto land. So that's a well-known spot. They usually come along the thin strip of land, the Crystal Coast, and then they sort of dissipate once they get back over the other side of the water and move into the inland locales. But yeah, they get a lot of rotation in that area for sure. That's a common spot.
There's actually a pretty nice couplet right now moving through portions of southern Alabama. We'll see if I can't bring that up and share some stuff. I got to turn off different layers of warnings. Tropical storm warnings apparently want to plot really, really big on my map. So we'll turn that off, and we'll try to bring up the Fort Rucker radar, or maybe, not sure if that one's up. Maybe we'll try bringing up a different radar site. But then this tornado warned storm has pretty much just been by itself over the past little bit. Hasn't had a whole lot of anything else to go around it. Hasn't really had any other circulation around it. We'll pull up that. And if we can get the radar data to load, there's my problem. I had it on maximum hail size. Probably not gonna have a ton of hail in these storms, but check out this. I mean, this little cell is just by itself right out here. The max DBZ on the Eglin radar is what, 45 DBZ? So certainly not the most impressive storm you've ever seen producing a tornado, but that's what these little things do. Is they're very small, very isolated, and they can spin up tornadoes pretty quickly as they move through. We'll get some of the storm relative motion on here. We'll probably have to go back a few frames because I think the rotation is certainly weakened a little bit now from what it was. But right through there's your little teeny tornado couplet. Can you find it? When you check out correlation coefficient, that's a nice little potential debris signature there. Usually to get a TDS, you want slightly higher base reflectivity in the area, but that with tropical stuff, it may be a little different in this case. And that beam height's got to get you interested is 4,000 feet too.
Yes, tropical environments are so much more sensitive. You get so much more surface rotation. And yet another reminder, even well inland, way far away from the center of the storm with tropical banding, you still get tornadoes. With hurricanes, that's one thing a lot of folks don't understand. They think it's just going to be a straight wind event. Well, no, there's smaller cells, convective cells with rotation and tornadic activities in places you wouldn't even think would happen.
And one other thing, these storms, guys, maybe a lot of our viewers who are watching tonight, these aren't your typical thunderstorms. You don't see a lot of lightning associated with tropical storms like this, with tornadoes and even just the rain moving in. They're, like Ricky was talking about, kind of low top events, so you don't really see a lot of lightning as well.
If any. I mean,
yeah, I've scanned it. I haven't seen any along the I'm looking in the Alabama, Florida panhandle right now. I don't see any lightning.
That was the remarkable thing with Arthur. Remember when Arthur made landfall and I was down there with one of our former Carolina Weather Group panelists? We were riding it out at his house, and there was actually some pretty vivid lightning with the spiral rain bands of Arthur, and that surprised me. You typically don't get that with the spiral bands, but that little storm managed to. Little storm it could.
You get a lot of convective wind, very low cumulus banding, and then the wind. It's almost like the pressures drop, so you have lower pressure, and then you get the gradient is stronger along the surface, and so that's what you end up getting, is these squall lines, one after another after another. Everywhere you see a convective cell in this radar image, there is strong winds associated with it. There's a surge in winds. So, it could be 25 miles per hour outside of it. Once you get near it, it's going to jump up 10 to 15 miles per hour. And this is just a tropical storm. And you get a category 3 and 4 hurricane, these bands, significantly much more wind. Yeah, you're right. Not a lot of lightning, unless they just don't have a lot of time to grow. I mean, the vertical stacking is more concentrated around the core. The outer banding they're moving so quickly, and the low-level jetting is so fast that they just move along. So they don't have a lot of time to stack. I mean, they do, but they're quickly dissipated, and so all that activity and energy is forced underneath.
And Shay, you and Ricky were talking about. Ricky was just showing that tornado warning. The Mobile office has allowed that to expire, so that is no more. Looking at the NWS chat, that's something that all three of us have access to, and we can monitor different areas throughout the country. And so looking at the Lake Charles, Louisiana chat right now, a lot of reports of flash flooding, street flooding, flooding across from Lake Charles. So you guys, as well as I do, we had that flooding event last year in Louisiana, and that's just, that area seems to get flood events every year. With Houston, Texas, also another place that really sees a lot of flooding, and it's just really low down there, a lot of lowland, and this water piles up, and the draining system is not the best there, and we see a lot of flash flooding there.
Well, and trouble a lot of times is when you get even a minor storm surge, and this storm is not producing a large storm surge, but there is a slight rise in the tides. A lot of these coastal areas, where do they drain into? Well, they drain into the ocean, or they drain into the Gulf, or they're nearby creeks and streams and tributaries. Well, when the water gets pushed back up, I know from firsthand experience in Eastern Virginia, the water can actually come up through the sewer drains. And when you get heavy rainfall, it's got nowhere to go. And so that sometimes exaggerates the flooding risk even more. This was interesting. Look at this visible sat.
I was going to say, yeah.
This is those outflows. Yep, outflows.
Yeah,
definitely.
All the little teeny stuff right through here, all little circulation, just as Shay was saying. Each little one has some gusty winds, and I'll try to put a 2-panel up here, and you can compare them side by side. Each one of these. But
I was going to say, each one of those during tropical events, they tend to be very strong mesovortices. So you get lots of vortical swirling going on within a lot of these little cells, and they're trying to spin, and they're that's by nature.
Yeah.
So there's going to be a lot of those little gust lines in there. That's what I was talking about with those winds that really crank up, they spike up within those convective cells.
I will say we do have Eric. Looks like he's going to be joining us in about 5 minutes. He and his team cover the Memphis, Tennessee area, so they're a little bit closer to Cindy than what Ricky, Shay, and myself are. So Eric will be on in just a little bit to talk about the Memphis area. Go ahead, Ricky.
I found a lightning strike for you right here.
Hey, next to Destin.
8 in the past 2 minutes, so it's trying, but not much.
Hiding.
And I will say,
there's a severe thunderstorm warning for a thunderstorm. So
yeah,
Ricky, now hold on, Ricky. That could be in Transformers blowing.
Oh, that's true.
I was going to say that severe warning just came out. They put the tornado possible tag on that as well. And I think you're showing us the velocities, Ricky, on that storm just a little bit ago.
Yeah, let's switch radar sources again. This is actually right where my dad used to live, Fort Walton Beach area. We'll switch to the Eglin Air Force Base radar. And here's the storm. No immediate couplet that I can find. If there's anything, it's right through there. It's a pretty weak little tornado potential, a weak little couplet. But a lot of times the tropical stuff, you kind of got to look up a little bit. There's a study I read a couple years ago that said look up, one scan above that base velocity scan, and sometimes you can find a better image of the couplet. And I'm not seeing that at this moment with this storm, but certainly, as Shay was talking about, any storm does try and get its act together, spin a little bit. And since this one is even probably out of all of the storms in the line, the best separated from the other cells, it'll have the best inflow from the south. It'll have the best moisture coming in from the south, and maybe get its act together and see what it can do here the next little bit.
Ricky, you brought up a good point about storm surge. So right now, actually today, starting today and tomorrow, we have king tides going on. So king tides is sort of a different word for perigean spring tides. So we're at the highest point where the moon is closest to the earth, the gravitational pull, everything it's making the high tides higher than normal. Let me see if I can share my screen. Ricky, if you don't mind, I'm going to stop presenting yours real quick. Just show mine. Go back. Looking at the winds, nothing crazy in Fort Walton right now, guys. So if I did share this to the Fort Walton group. If you're watching, nothing too crazy out there right now. And here we go. So
all above that.
Yeah. So Pensacola, you're getting, yes, well above hat. And you can see there. So the black line represents the forecast for the tides. Right now, the red line that was today is the observations made that are intact. So it goes down to the current time right now, which is about 7:41 p.m. Central Time. I think they go by Central Time in Pensacola. And then we go into time, we see that even tomorrow, an even higher tide. So we have the rains, the driving winds, which we'll probably have more of a south or south-southwest wind versus a south or southeast wind today. And that'll drive even more water into the coastline. So with winds comes extra water. With rains comes extra water as well. So you're well above hat. You're about almost 1.5 feet over hat value. So that is about 1 foot over high astronomical tide. And what that means is that's the line where they would draw for your area that would represent where flooding would start. So that's kind of where we are. And the king tides will last all the way for the next few days, and then they'll start to peter out by this weekend. But you can get an idea there. This is just one spot in Pensacola, Florida, that is destined to basically flood. Here's Grand Isle, Louisiana. You can see well over the values. The blue line, let me go back and look at the blue line. It was the original forecast for the area. That's what with the steady tide would be, according to the NOAA tide charts that they forecast for years out ahead of time based on the algorithm. And you can see that the verification of the red line well above that forecast, and the black line again tomorrow well above hat values by almost 1 foot. So be aware of the flooding potential for your area along the Gulf Coast.
Got you're muted, but you're trying to talk, so I'm going to jump in ahead of you there. And you know that's the interesting thing, Shay. We end up dealing with these events, and if you live at the coast, just as you very well know in Charleston, we sometimes get even minor flooding in some of these big king tide, full moon events, especially with an area low pressure anywhere nearby, where you can get some minor flooding even without some of the heavy rain. It's like Eric has joined us now, so I'll let Scotty handle everything. How's it going, Eric?
Hey, good evening. Can you guys hear me okay?
We got you.
Got you loud and clear.
Awesome. Good evening. How are you guys?
We're good, Eric. We're stretching some time here. You're a little bit closer to Cindy than any of us. So here in the Memphis area, I guess you guys aren't too unfamiliar with tropical events that come through the Gulf. So what are you guys expecting there in the Memphis area over the next few days?
Well, it's different for us to be the ones closer to the storm than you guys over there in the Carolinas. It's actually fairly unusual to see the remnants of one of these come through the Memphis area. We've had a couple that have gone a couple 100 miles away where we get some rain and stuff, a little bit of wind over the last, 4 or 5 years. But as you know, it's been a pretty quiet tropical time, I guess, the last several years. So it does look like, that the storm is going to be making landfall and then making a hard right turn up over Louisiana and southern Arkansas, and it looks like on the current track it's going to be coming right over the Memphis area, probably guessing sometime during the middle of the day Friday. The track has been fairly consistent, but the speed of the system has been changing somewhat, and so it's kind of varied from morning to late afternoon. Models are still having a little bit of difficulty with the exact speed of the system once it ejects out into the westerlies. But it looks like it'll be a daytime event on Friday. We're actually started getting the cloud cover today. And we'll start to see kind of the outer edge of the rain bands, maybe the first rain band starting to move in overnight tonight. So we're looking for showers to move in tonight. Really not expecting anything strong. The wind is running about 10 to 15 miles an hour or so right now, and it'll stay like that with just showers overnight. And then tomorrow it looks like that first kind of band moves through tonight into early tomorrow morning. During the day tomorrow, it kind of looks like a little bit of a lull, although, in this kind of atmosphere where we've got dew points in the lower 70s and the system off to our west, we could certainly see scattered showers and some thunderstorms. And actually, there's a slight risk that extends up just to the south of the Memphis area through western Mississippi, Louisiana, southeastern Arkansas. Kind of the east of that track, as you'd expect, that's where the threat of brief spin-up tornadoes is. Looks like that'll stay to our south, though, for tomorrow. But if we get a little bit of a lull in the shower and thunderstorm activity, we could get a little bit of heating, and that could contribute to a few thunderstorms around here during the day tomorrow. And then it looks like another potential band and I've said that on our blog earlier this evening. Trying to time out bands going out 24 to 36 hours is pretty difficult. But it looks like we may get another round heading into the overnight hours tomorrow night. And then as that low moves through into southern Arkansas, we'll definitely start to see more of an impact. I think the winds will pick up a little bit. During the day Friday, it looks like that low is going to track maybe just to the north of Memphis. And again, that's a little bit up in the air too. Models are still having a little bit of difficulty with exactly where that track runs, but as I mentioned in the blog, if that low goes to our north, we'll be in the right quadrant of the storm as it moves by from southwest to northeast. So we could get some convection and possibly a brief spin-up tornado again on Friday. Friday looks like the heavy rain day, and right now they're calling for anywhere from 2 to about 4 inches possible in the mid-south here. Could see some isolated higher amounts, but Friday will be when we get the biggest slug of moisture as that low passes over. And again, depending on the track, right now it looks like northern Mississippi probably has the better opportunity for those brief spin-up tornadoes. And we don't get these a whole lot, but I think the farther inland it gets, the weaker it gets. The threat of tornadoes also goes down a little bit as well. So I think it's probably a remote chance, but still something to consider. And then it looks like maybe it moves out to Friday night, and hopefully our weekend is not too bad. So,
interesting thing, we were talking about potential for small little spin-up tornadoes. The one thing we typically have going against us sometimes when we talk about tornadic development in our area is LCL height. Probably don't have to worry about that with tropical moisture at all.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that and the wind shear are both typically present. You just got to get a lot of times just a little bit of destabilization, maybe ahead of a feeder band or something, to kind of kick one of those off. So,
Eric, how's your rain situation been leading up to this event? I know here in the Carolinas it's been really wet over the past couple of months. I'm sure you guys kind of above normal rainfall wise. Is this going to create some big flooding concerns?
We definitely could have some possibility of some flash flooding. Actually, we're really not too bad right now. We've had some events that have been fairly significant over the last few weeks, but they've been separated by some fairly drier periods between those. And our rainfall to date is actually a little bit below normal. So I think we'll be able to take some. Now, if we get 2 inches in an hour or something like that, of course, that's gonna cause some problems. And I think the better threat of that is going to be on Friday. They have not issued flash flood watches for us yet, even with the potential rain for tomorrow. So I think that's a tip of the hat to the fact that that rainfalls tomorrow probably won't be as heavy, and we're capable of taking some water at this point before it really gets to be a problem. But Friday, I think I wouldn't be surprised at all to see a flash flood watch out, and then just issuing warnings as necessary if as that system moves overhead. Could be, some pretty obviously tropical rains. You're going to get pretty efficient rainfall out of those, and so not unusual to see 1.5 to 2 inches in an hour if you get a heavy band right over top.
We were talking earlier about some of the river potential for flooding. Some of the upstream areas that get some flooding across, or get a lot of rain, I should say, across central Kentucky, central Tennessee. Does any of that water flow down into your area?
Yeah, that's all part of the Mississippi River Basin, and so the Tennessee River flows into the Ohio River right near its confluence into the Mississippi River up around west of Paducah, Kentucky, Cairo, Illinois, and that all flows to the south. Fortunately, our kind of spring flood period is gone. So I was just, a matter of fact, I was just going to check the gauge here at Memphis and see what it's at, because I haven't looked at it in a while. But a month or so ago, we definitely would have been a little more concerned. We were above flood stage here in Memphis, which is not, atypical for spring, late April, May time period. But yeah, even with the rainfall here, the forecast keeps it many feet below flood stage. So I think the Mississippi will be fine. Some of the tributaries, the smaller tributaries that flow into the Mississippi, since that river is pretty low, they tend to handle the water and push it off. They flow right directly into the main stem here in Memphis. So they tend to wash off pretty quickly as well. But some of them could get a little bit higher if we get a decent amount of rain in a short period of time. But overall, I don't think there's going to be too much of a threat of river flooding out of this. The main concern I think we're going to have is going to be, that flash flooding, and then the urban flooding, which we tend to get here too, with just, all the concrete and everything. You guys are familiar with that over in your major cities as well. Areas that you get an inch of rain and you just know to avoid. That's definitely a concern here as well.
All right. Scotty, I think that's pretty much all we got. We've kind of dissected most of it.
I was going to talk a little bit about, folks are asking, what's going on in the tropics right now? Well, why are we having all this activity? And, it's not very common to see this much action in June. We do, like I said earlier, in the Gulf, we tend to get some systems that fire off in the Gulf. In fact, that's a little bit normal for this time of the year to see a system, but they're usually more of a homegrown system. They're close to the coast, tail end of a cold front with high pressure to the north, driving down into it, and gets a little spin going. And then next thing you know, we have a small system trying to develop that quickly goes on to land. So this one came from the Yucatan Peninsula. Basically, a lot of moisture transfer from the Eastern Pacific into the Gulf with easterly trades all mixing together the right ingredients. We almost had another situation about a week and a half ago that we were watching as well. It was actually a crossover storm. I think it was Beatriz that went ashore of southern Mexico along Chiapas and Oaxaca. And then that system drifted across into the Gulf and gave us a nice washout along the cold front through the southeast region there. So that's actually two systems from the Eastern Pacific, or two batches of energy from the Eastern Pacific that have drifted northward to cause some sort of rainfall or effects here along the eastern United States, that sort of energy transfer. I'll go ahead and share screen. We'll take a look at what to expect down the road. I know we're going to look at the GFS again, and this is just sort of once you get out to about 108 hours out, things start to become erroneous. But you can see the large Bermuda Azores ridge that's built from basically the Azores all the way to Bermuda, and you'll see that this high pressure, this is a typical blocking pattern in the summer, where this high pressure just dominates the entire Atlantic Ocean, and that's what drives those easterly trades and all the waves coming off of Africa. You see one trying to form there. This is really, really early out to tell. You're talking 186 hours. That little wave right there probably won't be there by the time the hours come around to it. But we also look at the Saharan air layer, and this is dust that is pushed aloft and comes off of the coast of Africa. This is at the mid-levels at about 18,000 feet. This dust is iron-rich. It basically causes cool air, cool, dry air at the mid-levels that systems cannot develop from. It's just too dry of an environment. It's too stable of an environment for systems. You can see these tropical waves coming off of Africa one after the other and dissipating into this, basically this Saharan air layer, or we call it the SAL. So that's always something we look at. The one that we got, Brett, snuck pretty far south of this air layer, and the air layer relaxed just a little bit. It comes and goes in pulses. We call this the dusty tongue of the Atlantic, and it extends all the way out over into areas of Puerto Rico and even as far as Miami, Florida, where we get some of that dust fallout in northern South America. Makes for really cool sunsets, but it is always something that we try to keep an eye on, because mid-levels is where a lot of tropical systems get their energy from. If you get a mid-level low over a surface low, your chances are pretty good for a tropical system to develop. When it does not have that mid-level low, or it cannot develop it, then you usually will not see that. So that's it for at least the Eastern Atlantic. The Gulf is going to be quiet for the next few days. We start to look at the El Nino. El Nino values are high. We go from west to east from the Western Central Pacific, basically, or the Western Pacific over and from one region to another. Looks like values are high right now. At least they may jump around a little bit. We need a 0.5 above 0 in order to get El Nino values, which There's been some talk about sliding back into an El Nino before the end of the summer, but plume models are starting to sort of trend. There's kind of splitting. There's more of a consensus that will stay in a neutral phase for the rest of the year. However, that could change in time, and this is Nino 3, which is getting into towards the Eastern Pacific, and then the far Eastern Pacific near South America. This is always a very volatile region. It's not really something you can really go by. You have to gauge for South American coastline. It's very important to know when it's really high because you get higher rain events in that area. But let me see if I can find the discussion. I thought I had it up here with the plume model discussion. Oh, there it is right there. Okay, good. So here's the mid-May. This is the latest from what's called the INSO diagnostics from NOAA, the predictions. This graph basically is showing us what the trend is for us to slide into an El Nino season or neutral or La Nina. La Nina being 0.5 degrees Celsius below the 0 line and El Nino being 0.5 degrees Celsius above the 0 line. You can see the plume models are split. The main averages keep, most of the averages keep below, right at or below to neutral. We do see sort of a dynamic average going up above that. And we'll have to watch and see what happens, but it looks like it's not going to occur until late summer, early fall. So these letters down here are, we have April, May, June, July, June, July, August, and so on and so forth, where when you get further out in time, these plumes start to split even more. So we're just not sure yet. We're still in neutral. They have not issued an El Nino watch. I don't expect that to happen in the next few months. I think we'll stay in neutral and we'll keep the NOAA forecast hurricanes. So I think, what was it, Ricky? I need to look that up again. I think about 14 or 15 named storms. Do you recall?
Right. I think you're right, Shu.
So we'll have to keep watching.
One thing we haven't touched on a lot is sea surface temperatures. How are those looking?
Sea surface temperatures. That is a good question. Let me pull up. I'm going to have to do some typing, so bear with me. One of my favorite products to use for sea surface temperatures is the NASA Sport SST. This gives you a 2 kilometer, which is a high resolution real-time data. If we look at the Gulf of Mexico, we're probably going to see this change when you see the track of Cindy come through. You'll see a swath. You can actually kind of get a footprint of the storm in this area wherever a tropical system goes through. It's kind of neat. So that's the Gulf of Mexico. It's like mid to upper 80s. It's probably going to cool down just a little bit. That surface layer is not very thick. So we talk about tropical cyclone heat potential, where you have enough heat at the surface to capture enough depth in the water to fuel a storm. So we call that the pelagic or the epipelagic zone of the water, and how deep that water is, how deep the warm layer is in that water really can make or break a system. If there's a lot of cool water upwelling, starting to fumble my words here, then that tends to dissipate a system when you get cooler water at the surface. It doesn't have a lot to feed off of from the surface. So we'll probably see this map change over the next day or two when it fills in from today's activity from there. And if we look at, let's see, Southeast region, a little bit of cooling along the shelf waters, and that's from a lot of rain, heavy rain events. We got a little bit of offshore winds across central and northern Florida, so we have some cool water upwelling there. We also have, let's see, southern region, eastern region north. Okay. Sea surface temperatures up there. Of course, the Labrador Current and the cooler waters, things stay pretty cool up that way. But along the Gulf Stream in the southeast, we stay pretty warm this time of the year. In fact, I'm surprised that there's, right along the coastline, it's still pretty warm. And we were registering, go to Datascope, I'll tell you the exact temperatures. And here, at least here in Charleston, we're at 82.8 degrees. So right along the immediate coastline, we're still, that pier is down at Myrtle Beach still from Matthew. 79.2 degrees at Wilmington, and Savannah, 83.2 degrees. So we're like upper 70s to low 80s along the immediate East Coast. But right out here along the Florida Hatteras Slope and the Blake Plateau, looks like it's cooled off a little bit. Maybe had a little cool water injection. Maybe some of this cool water upwelling from Florida kind of filtering to the north along the southerly winds. That's what I'm thinking is happening. when you get these offshore winds, you get that cool water up only just off the coastline. So that's kind of what's going on for our sea surface temperatures. They're not really changing very much for the Carolinas. We're in the upper 70s, even all the way up in North Carolina, upper 70s to low 80s, down to, from, I would say, Jacksonville, Florida, all the way up to Wilmington, North Carolina. And then it starts to, a few cool pockets when you get into Outer Banks. Back to you, Scotty.
Thank you. And I think, Eric, did you have something to wanted to mention?
No, he was talking about the where the storms form this time of year, and I thought it was, and I think it was borne out by statistics that Brett really was an anomaly, having an Atlantic or an Eastern Atlantic wave coming across this time of year. I know usually those storms that cross the Atlantic don't usually really start get going until peak of season, August to September, and a lot of the development obviously is right in the Gulf of Mexico and Caribbean this time of year, which is what we got with Cindy. But it was pretty unusual to see. I don't remember if it was Ryan Maui or somebody that tweeted that they hadn't, from the 150-year historical record, there'd never been a storm that formed in that area of the ocean this early in the year. So pretty unusual.
Yeah, it is. I mean, right off the southern. I mean, the way that the ITCZ is set up this time of the year, you don't get a lot of these spins. I mean, they're further south. They just don't get a lot of. I mean, that wave held together right off the coastline all the way over. So yeah, I mean, it was pretty impressive. It made its way through a lot of dry air as a small compact wave. That once it got to the, I would say, a couple hundred miles east of the Windward Islands, that wave axis turned over to the northwest, and the whole thing just sort of started coming together.
So what do you think, guys?
Pretty impressive. Okay.
Can we read into that at all for whether we're going to have an active ITCZ? Boy, that's something that's hard to get out there. Zone, that with the waves off of Africa?
That's a good question. We have to look at the sea surface temperature anomalies and keep an eye on those. There was a nice warm body off the African coast along the ITCZ. But the 7-day change, it's gotten a little bit cooler. It's kind of been up and down and inconsistent. But if that body of water stays warm, and it all has to do with the Hadley cell and Walker circulations along that area, as how much air is sinking, cooler air sinking, and how much warm air is rising. It's going to be tricky. It's going to be tricky to see. We'll have to watch. I'd say we probably know in the next 3 or 4 weeks if we're going to have a pretty active season as to how long that warm body stays in that area, especially even in the northeast, off the northeast United States. We had that guest on that talked about that area being a hotspot for a tropical system, or at least a hurricane, to make it up that way.
Hurricane City.
Yes, Jim.
Hurricane City.
Yep.
It's remarkable to me, though. I cannot recall the last time we had a Cape Verde hurricane make its way towards or into the United States. Do any of you recall the last one?
No, I mean, the last active season was what, 2000? I mean, pretty active season, 2005. I can't remember if one affected us then, but
a lot of the big ones recently have been forming in the Caribbean. You had Sandy, you had Matthew, I think, form in the Caribbean.
Yeah,
interesting.
Yeah, we had a whole sloth of systems last year. They had to create an entirely high resolution separate product, and then I mean, just for South Carolina, we had so many systems. There was so much crossover in the paths over time that they just said, all right, we're going to put a really high resolution map in there for everybody to see what all the activity happened. But a lot of those came up from the Caribbean area. They sort of came together there, and a couple of them along tail ends of cold fronts, or just waves that came out along the ITCZ, along the western ITCZ, at least along that area. So,
yes, the last one, 2012, there was Isaac, and that formed, oh boy, going back in time here, let's see. That formed not near the Cape Verde Islands, but it did form, the middle of the Atlantic and move west. Of course, we had other storms that year, too. 2012 was an active
and that was actually one of the last ones to bring any impact here to our area too. It kind of fell apart over southern Arkansas. But we got some rain out of it.
Yeah. Remember Isaac? Isaac's probably the last storm I remember too. That was a huge rainmaker for Louisiana. I would think it sat there for like a good amount of time and just flooded Louisiana like crazy.
Yep.
One thing I want to hit before we've turned this into an hour show. I didn't think we could do that, but we did.
When you get nerds talking, that's what happens.
One thing I want to talk about, and this is our first experience with it. National Hurricane Center kind of put out some new products this go around this year with potential tropical cyclone development. And actually, I think the possibility of issuing warnings and stuff before systems or watches and warnings, advisories before systems are fully formed. What do you guys' early opinion? Too early to tell right now, or should we give it a couple more storms? What do you guys think?
I think from my perspective, now granted, I'm a meteorologist. I understand all this stuff, and I know what they're meaning. And I grew up on the coast, so I understand tropical weather. And I think, get what the Hurricane Center is trying to do. I love it personally, only because it gives you much more advanced warning. Think about the places along the Gulf Coast. You wouldn't have had, I think they gave them like 18 plus hours advance notice for a tropical storm from a watch or warning perspective, at least with a product out. The issue, I think, comes for a lot of meteorologists in calling it a cyclone and calling it a potential. I really don't get that. I think a lot of it is just a lack of maybe understanding what the Hurricane Center is trying to do. I heard a lot of people saying, why can't we just call it a potential tropical storm, whatever. I was like, well, because each of those has specific definitions. It's kind of the same thing we ran into with Sandy, the terminology sometimes comes into play. I was really interested to get Stacy on here, and hopefully we can ask these questions at a later time too, to see kind of how the Hurricane Center developed this, whether they talked to some social scientists, whether they got some input or how they came to the idea of calling it a potential cyclone instead of a potential, anything else.
Well, one thing that there's got to be some clarification with this because, and there is clarification, don't get me wrong, but it's going to take some time to sort of get into the habit of using this because, first of all, a wave is an invest if there's potential for it, and that's still going to be used. Now, if it's going to be a possible threat to land, that's when they're going to start using potential cyclone terminology, potential tropical cyclone, which PTC for many of us has always meant post-tropical cyclone. So, I think for Mets it might be a little bit of a task to get used to, but they're trying to get this PTC terminology or nomenclature instilled in order to get the warning systems out for these islands, especially when you get into the Windward Islands, Lesser Antilles, Greater Antilles. You're dealing with a different kind of governorship there. They have to make a call on it. The mayors do. Versus here, we have a weather authority issue the tropical storm warnings. We have to get this word out to them. So the potential tropical cyclone may have some implications there that we're not very well aware of, politically speaking. So there could be some tie-in with that. That's kind of my take on it. There's always a sort of a flip side to the coin that we may not know about. But there's been some definite people saying, what's the deal with this thing? So that's just to be clear, is only if there's going to be land affected or there's potential for land to be affected, they'll put this PTC terminology in there. So it'll go from invest to PTC to depression to tropical storm to hurricane. It could very well do it in that order.
It is interesting, though. It seems like we always jump tropical depression state and go straight to storm. And it's just, I think because we have better technology now to detect the winds in a storm, and oftentimes they're at tropical storm strength by the time it becomes a fully tropical cyclone. Eric?
Yeah, that definitely plays into it. I'm just curious to see the first time that they issue this potential tropical cyclone and then it doesn't develop.
Yeah.
What happens when you put the warnings out? And this one I kind of had my doubts about for a little bit, especially when they first put that out, because there was still some question: is it going to become tropical or will it be subtropical? And is it going to eventually, obviously, it got its kind of act together, but what you're always a little wary in the weather community of crying wolf and calling something before it gets there. And is there going to be pressure on the Hurricane Center if they've called it a potential storm? Well, it's kind of borderline, but it's about to make landfall. We got to call it something so that we can verify our statistics.
I think they held off pretty long on this one too, before even naming it a potential cyclone. I think they held off probably for an extra day when it came down to that designation.
Well, and was that just because you can't really call it that until you get it within watch, until it's within watch criteria, which is 48 hours. So you really can't call it that until you're within 48 hours of landfall when you can officially issue the watch, because that's the only time they're going to call it that. So
all good questions for Stacy when he joins us.
Yeah, I'll be interested to hear all that.
Well, we'll invite you back on, Eric. for that show. We'll let you know our reschedule, and you can join us. So
well, I appreciate you reaching out tonight too. Thank you.
Yeah, before we log off, I want to let you go ahead one last time, kind of talk about what you're telling your people, what the effects is going to be for the Memphis area, and then kind of promote your social media and how our followers can to reach you.
Yep, absolutely. So the remnants, I guess it'll probably be a tropical depression, Cindy, when it comes pretty close to right over the Memphis area during the day Friday. We're looking at the risk of showers and thunderstorms tomorrow, a slight chance to our south, mainly for a few brief spin-up tornadoes. Tomorrow shouldn't be too bad other than just a kind of a wet day. Friday move right overhead. We're looking for sustained winds, probably in the 25 to 30, maybe as much as 30. Right near the center, could gust to 40, and watching again to the right of the track for potential isolated tornado spin-ups. Lot of water. Looks like we're going to be 2 to 4 inches by the time this is all done for a good part of the area right here around Memphis. So we'll hope that it clears out and makes for a nice weekend. I do know there's nice high pressure building in next week. Dew points are going to drop. We're looking really forward to getting past this and enjoying a little more springtime weather here in the middle of summer now. So that should be good. Appreciate you having me on. You can follow me at Memphis Weather 1. It's the number 1, Memphis Weather 1, for Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, I'm on YouTube, blog, and mobile apps. We've got Stormwatch Plus, which covers the whole nation. So if you're over there watching the Carolinas, check out Stormwatch Plus for your iPhone. It'll give you those severe weather warnings when they come out from the Weather Service. You put in your location, and it will send those warnings directly to you. You got Weather Service forecasts. It's all Weather Service driven data. So you've got local Mets driving the information that goes to that app. We'd love you to check it out.
Yep, I got it right here. Stormwatch. So
there you go.
There you go. So
thank you.
Yeah, no problem. And if any of our followers ever traveling through Memphis or maybe have family there, or vacation home, whatever, make sure you follow Eric and those guys over there. They do a great job. And Eric, you guys have a great relationship with the people there and also the Weather Service. So that's always some good kudos there for everything you guys do there in the Memphis area.
Thanks. And anytime you guys are coming over to Graceland or for some barbecue, let me know.
That's it. All right, guys. Well, we'll log off here tonight. So, Ricky, for Ricky and Shay, we thank you guys for watching our, our hurricanes or tropical storm Cindy coverage. Kind of a last-minute thing here. We're very closely with the Hurricane Center to get Stacy back on. Hopefully we can get that rescheduled very soon. So again, thanks for watching tonight. Next week we have Mike Cox and Amber, oh man, I can't remember her, Jennifer Wojcinski with Weather Eye. They both Mike and Jennifer, they work kind of doing weather through the radio, through the airwaves. So we're going to kind of talk about that next week. So make sure you join us. And then after that, we're going to have John Ziegler on. He's the new chief meteorologist at the Fox affiliate in Charlotte. That's the July 5th show. So some exciting shows coming up. And the whole month of July is scheduled. And I think, Shay, almost everything in August is already scheduled. So we've done pretty well with scheduling everything. So make sure you tune in and log on to our Facebook page, keep up with our schedule, and make sure that you're subscribed to our podcast and follow us along there. So for everyone here at the Carolina Weather Group, we hope you have a great weekend, and we'll see you next Wednesday night.